Hey everybody, Thomas M. Copeland here, and we've got a great episode today with legendary four-time Emmy Award-winning casting director. Stick with us, coming up soon. Welcome to the Big Break Pod. I'm your host, Thomas M. Copeland, and today we have a really fantastic and exciting guest for you. Today's guest is four-time Emmy Award-winning casting director John Frank Levey. He is the author of Write for the Role, a fantastic book that I read leading up to our interview. He actually came to me and was suggested to me as a guest by Wendy Elaine Wright, who was another guest on another episode here on the Big Break Pod. And we talked in her interview the whole time. And then towards the end, she just kind of started going through some books that she had written and some books that had really influenced her and that she suggested. She pulls out John's book and says, "Write for the Role. You got to see it. You got to read it. You got to get John on your show." And then she just kind of brushed past and moved on. And I thought, maybe, maybe I'll do that. Maybe I'll shoot an email over to him and maybe he'll answer it. And that's exactly what happened. I went and Googled him, found him right away, shot him a quick email, and he was wonderfully gracious in his reply. His reply read, quote, "Yes, I'll be there," which was great. And so with that, we scheduled for, his day and time, and he came in, and he was just absolutely wonderful. He wrote the book in 2022, so it's been about 2 years. I think he's been on the tail end of what's probably a pretty exhausting book tour since then. So he was, anyway, like I said, he was gracious enough to join us anyway, which is wonderful, especially for a podcast that hadn't been released at the time. How did he know whether the podcast was good or not? He just said, "Sure, I'll do it." So good. Kudos to him. I love his attitude for that. And anyway, turns out the interview was really fantastic. I go into the interview talking a little bit about the book and why the book really inspired me. And I have to say, one of the things that really got me, that I see as a theme in my life as I do continue to read and become more and more curious about different books out there. I've read a number of different biographies. I most recently read Marlon Brando's biography, which was really interesting. But I've read a number of other biographies as well. I love biographies. Maybe you're out there and you're listening and you do too. By the way, side note, all the Founding Father biographies by Walter Isaacson and a few others, incredible books as well. I've really enjoyed those. But anyway, staying on point. What really got me about John's book is just how open and vulnerable he is from the opening pages of the preface all the way through to the epilogue. He talks a lot about his personal life and how it's shaped who he is and how it shaped the kind of casting director that he was and is. And so that really kind of got me because, I am somebody who's sort of struggled with vulnerability. It's hard for me to kind of always show my soft and vulnerable and empathetic side, I think. And, it's something that I'm learning to get better and better at. So when, he opens his book with his, divorce and how it affected him and how he was a child of divorce, I mean, it just struck me immediately as this is a guy who's really putting himself out there. And I really respect that. And really kind of sort of even envy that in some ways. And I hope that I, as a human and as an artist, continue to be able to be that vulnerable as well. So many kudos to John. I highly suggest his book. Again, it's called Write for the Role. We talk a lot about it throughout this interview. You can catch it on Amazon. You can also catch it at his website. If you order the book through his website, he'll sign it and send it to you, which I think is pretty cool. And that website is John Frank Levey. That's LEVEY.com. You can also follow him on Instagram. It's his name. Again, LEVEY, Levey. And that's John_Frank_Levey on Instagram. So please do give him a follow. Definitely grab the book and stick around for the interview. It's coming up in just a minute.
If you're an actor serious about your craft, then you know you're serious about improving your read, your presentation, and your on-camera delivery. And there's no faster way to sharpen your skills than with detailed, collaborative feedback from your fellow actors, directors, casting directors, coaches, and other creative professionals in the industry. So how do you get in front of the people you need to impress? with Show Coach. Available for Apple and Android, this exciting app gives you a stage to showcase your work, including self-tapes, reels, and monologues, specifically to solicit feedback from the professionals who can hire you. And for a limited time, Show Coach is absolutely free to use. Industry professionals can apply to become a coach and earn money for critiquing student posts. Download the app as a student or coach from your mobile app store or visit showcoach.app to learn more. That's showcoach.app. Show Coach, artists encouraging greatness.
All right, everybody, welcome back. I have maybe my most exciting guest for this season so far, I have to say. I am super excited that Mr. John Frank Levey is here.
No, Levey.
Thank you. We're going to redo that. You good, Alex? All right, cool. All right, welcome back, everybody. I am so excited to have our guest here today. This is one of my most exciting guests of the season, in my opinion. We have Mr. John Frank Levey here with us today. And John, if you don't know it, has for nearly 4 decades, John has been instrumental in casting some of TV's biggest hits, including ER, The West Wing, and Shameless, one of my favorite shows, in fact, among many, many others that you've seen. He's the proud recipient of the CSA's prestigious Hoyt Bowers Award for Lifetime Achievement, and also the proud recipient of 4 Primetime Emmy Awards. And his book, which we're talking about today, Right for the Role, is a must-read for actors, and really anyone who's interested in some great Hollywood tales, as I am. So welcome. Thank you so much for being here, John.
No, thank you very much for the invitation. I appreciate the opportunity.
Awesome. Well, let's hop right into it. And I have to say, I did read the book in preparation for this. It was something that somebody recommended I read. I did. It is fantastic. And I have to say, my favorite part about it are 2 things. One, that indeed there are some great Hollywood stories in it. But number 2, it's deeply personal to you in a way that almost, I mean, it does feel like an autobiography. And I think my first question is, John, was that very much intentional for you, and why?
Funny enough, it was the opposite of intentional. I tried desperately during the course of the process to not be personal. And the woman who I wrote the book with, Trudy Roth, without whom there would be no book, kept saying, your stories are great and you're funny and smart and you've been around a lot of really interesting people and you've had all these good events. But the book wants to encourage people to grow and change as people and to reveal themselves through their artistry and their relationships and whatever else they're into as people. And if you don't share yourself, the book will fall flat. And one of the early readers of the book was my ex-wife, the mother of my children. And she said, gee, John, you had a great career. You really loved what you were doing and you had so much success. Why'd you have to talk about our marriage so much? And, and I said, because it fueled me when it was happy and it fueled me when it was unhappy. And so I learned from Trudy that nothing I did or accomplished or achieved or experienced was of interest unless it was colored by my thoughts and feelings about it.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. That all sort of crystallizes it. Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, one of the ways that it starts actually is that you mentioned in the book that, and I'm going to read this off. Just bear with me for one moment.
Sure.
You mentioned that you have been at various times of your life. I'm going to read this off. Innocent kid, enabling son, estranged son. Great way that those were put together. Nervous new parent, workaholic, dedicated family man, divorcee, company man, long-term partner, entrepreneur, and now author. And I have to say, when I first read that, it kind of gave me pause because I saw myself in a lot of those pieces. I myself see myself in both if you're being completely, vulnerable, I will too, as also a divorcee myself, an entrepreneur, not quite an author yet. But anyway, my question is this. That was written in 2022, I believe. And have you added to that list since 2022 is my first question.
Well, I'm at the time of my life where discovery is happening again, because it has been like uh, President Joe Biden. It was time for me to pass the torch, and I'm not trying to uh, work in television at the moment. I've discovered that I only want to work on things with people I like, people I care about, who are doing things I care about. And fortunately, my house is paid for, and my kids are doing all right, and um, I'm solvent, and so I can really just do whatever makes me feel good, and and that's an important part of my life now in my winter years. I'm I'm very much interested in maintaining my creativity, and I'm going back to my roots. I'm working on uh, developing new plays, getting together actors in my living room and reading plays and talking about them and seeing if we can give them some life and making them grow and become more. Um, I just cast a film in that was shot in Miami uh, for a very low budget film for an old friend of mine who runs the New York Film Academy in Miami, Herschel Faber, and that was fun. And I think we got a good cast, and I'm excited to see the cut when the time comes. Old friends call me every once in a while and say, "Hey, would you do this for me? Would you do that for me?" And if they're old friends, I usually say yes. And sometimes it's a great experience, and sometimes I regret it. But old friends have a special place in my heart, and we went through a lot together. We accomplished a lot together, and
Yeah.
thank you for mentioning those shows. Each of them changed my life in a different way.
Yeah. So, John, would you say that this is sort of the first time that you found yourself being able to say that you've got space to be able to do these things? Because, I mean, the book goes through, childhood, through early career, right on through. And, I think you're unashamed to admit that for many of those years you were a workaholic, right? And that's what the book is kind of about and how that affected your personal life. I'm
I
just
was
curious.
dedicated to my job.
That's right. That's right. And so, is this kind of the first time in your adult or professional life that you're able to now kind of have some space to really just do the things you love? I mean, is that? It sounds like that's where you're at.
Yeah,
But you
I
never
mean,
had that before.
it has. I mean, I have always had a creative life, and I've been so graced by that opportunity to be creative and to be around other creative people and to care about what I do and to I gave a copy of the book to my longtime boss, John Wells, and I described it. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to have meaningful work, because meaningful work is a real gift. So many people hate their jobs, or are working their jobs because they have to pay the rent and support their children and their families and whatever. But I loved every minute of my long casting career in television because I was in a creative, collaborative community of people who loved their work, loved each other, respected each other, and dedicated themselves to the project at hand. And also, it was unspoken, but I think most of us also knew we were on a journey of growing and changing and getting better and hoping that we could become our best selves.
Yeah. There's I don't want to do too many spoilers here, but I will refer to a couple of moments in the book. And one moment that you're reminding me of now is when the executive at Warner Brothers, I believe, reached out because there was an episode of ER that came out that really touched her, and she called you to personally tell you your episode last night made me cry. And so what you're reminding me of is that when you say that the work we did was important and it had an impact and it had an effect, that is the effect. The effect is that you were finding the actors who would go on screen and portray a character in a moment that moved people literally to tears, and that's what you saw as the impact of this work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I often say ER particularly, and West Wing as well, and Shameless in its own way, and other shows as well. I mean, we television has enormous impact. It shapes. I think uh, I don't know what the number would be. 1 million people went into the medical professions because they saw ER when they were kids.
Mhm.
500,000 people are in government service because they watched West Wing. Uh, I don't know whether
What's the inspiring numbers of Frank?
yeah, exactly. I was just going to say more than 500,000 people drink too much and have irresponsible, unprotected sex because of Shameless.
Yeah, and waste their new livers.
Exactly.
No, but really, I mean, that's great. That's hilarious. But yeah, really, I mean, that's and also that at its heyday in the '90s, of course, if you want to argue the '90s were the heyday, at least certainly in your career they were. I mean, ER was airing to what 40 million people, something insane like that.
That's correct. And I always like to say that if the people under 10 were asleep and the people over 75 were asleep, 40 million people probably represented something like 20 to 25% of the people in America who were awake.
Hmm.
I mean, that's you almost can't get that many people to vote in a consequential presidential election.
Yeah,
Um, it was astonishingly important, and we gave information on mental health issues, on diversity, on sex and drugs and AIDS, and that the government wasn't effectively communicating to people,
hmm,
and I'm enormously proud of what the television shows that I was associated with was able to accomplish.
yeah, and it certainly shines through in the book, and it's a great read on the chapters for ER, unquestionably. John, I'm curious about you talked a little bit about your father in the book, and about him being a newspaper man at a time when newspaper man was very much a revered, career, right? I mean, it was almost an academic career, very much a revered career at New York Times, I believe. Is that right? Do I have that
That's
part right?
correct.
Yeah. And you mentioned being able to have space today to write scenes, write plays, have readings in your living room. I too I consider myself to be a writer. I've written a full screenplay. I love to write, love it. So I'm curious, what did you learn from your father as a news? Did you learn some skills, some literary skills from your father as a newspaper man?
Well, as I think I started out the book by saying that my dad uh, told me how to write a book report or an essay, and it was tell him what you're going to tell him, tell him what you told him.
Mm,
And so I had that very much in mind. But he also famously said, seat of the pants to the seat of the chair, meaning, it's all in the doing. You can't
mm,
think about it or talk about it or fantasize about it or hope for it. You got to actually do it. And if you do something for 40 years and you don't get good at it,
mhm,
that's probably a fundamental issue.
mm.
So I had some inspiration as a young casting director, but I got confidence and skill along the way. And I think I'm the best casting director I've ever been today, uh, although the opportunities are narrower than they once were.
Sure. And has writing stuck with you all these years? Has it been something that you would consider to kind of be like a passion? Has it been something that's been a part of your life?
Oh, it's something I shied away from completely. My dad was a writer. My older brother was a newspaper man as well and a columnist on the Washington Post.
Mm,
My mom was a scientist, and she translated medical documents and research into grants applications. So she was a writer as well.
mhm.
I think in my whole life, uh, the idea of an empty page or now an empty screen um, is as intimidating as anything I could possibly do. And again, I never could have accomplished Right for the Role without Trudy. I
Mhm.
mean, she interviewed me intelligently. She researched me. thoroughness. That I mean, she made me remember. At the very beginning of our process, she made me send her an email every day, at least once a day, of a memory.
Hmm.
And I started to write doing that. And the thing I love about the book is that people have said that it sounds like talking to me.
Yeah.
And you know, that is captured, I think, by Trudy, because she got me to talk
Hmm.
as myself. Some people say I sound like John Malkovich, but I am John Frank Levey.
That's right. Yeah, that's an interesting practice to daily think of a memory. How long did that go on for?
Quite a while.
Yeah.
You know, we because we started the book in the pandemic, our first meetings were on Zoom, like what we're doing now.
Hmm.
And then later we graduated to my backyard, where we sat at opposite ends of a 8-foot table, and you know, eventually we were able to share space in a more direct way. But I think in some ways that gave me a bit of anonymity, or a bit of uh, I was able to reveal myself more openly and honestly, because I wasn't in a room with anybody else, or I was, you know, in a funny way, the Zoom culture is able to make you more honest and open
Hmm.
than being in the same space with another person.
Interesting. Maybe because we wear those masks when we're physical with people, right? The
Yeah,
masks
we're
that you speak a
we're
lot about in the film
projecting
or in the
we're
book.
projecting an image of ourselves rather than being authentically ourselves.
Yeah. Well, and that really leads right into sort of the next thing that I wanted to talk about, which is really how you evaluate actors, which is what you did for 4 decades. So I think you've probably
Yeah.
got some. I think you've probably got some good points to make on this. One of the lessons that you reveal in the book is that there's two kinds of actors: those that get it and those that have to do it. Right? Those that get to do it and those that have to do it. And you have a wonderful story in there that really illustrates this. I have a question though. So that's, I'm sure, a skill you were able to over time start to spot in actors. Is that true? Is that something you were able to kind of start to see in actors, or were actors really good at kind of hiding which one they were?
Well, no, I was able to discern that, and you know, I'm a watcher, and a listener. I've always been that, and I, as you know from the book, I grew up in a kind of progressive and interesting household before it fell apart. Um, it, my parents had diverse and interesting friends, and as a very young kid, I was in the room watching them, and I had an instinctive feeling that developed over time, coalesced over time, about who was being real and who was wearing a mask, as you say.
Mm-hmm.
And I was always drawn to the people who were being real, and that early set of experiences set up my instinctive approach to casting. A lot of casting directors watch everything on television. I don't know how they do it now. It's impossible,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and they are encyclopedic about actors.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm instinctive about actors. Uh, I think, well, do I want to spend time with this person? And is it the same set of qualities that I want to spend time with the character?
Mm-hmm.
And you know, can they marry their own realness with the realness of the circumstances of the character? And not can they pretend to be the character, can they act like the character, but can they empathize with the character? Can they identify with the character? Can they what if themselves into the character's circumstances,
Mm-hmm.
whatever the circumstances are? You know, that is a very that quote that there are two kinds of actors, one that has to and one that gets to, is something that a lot of good interviewers have picked up during my conversations. And you know, who would ever play? Who are the great? You know, who would ever play Breaking Bad? Who would ever play Medea?
Mm-hmm.
who would ever play any of the Iago? Who would ever play any of the great villains of their time? A director actor that I worked with briefly in the 80s at the Mark Taper Forum, a Jewish British man named Steven Berkoff. He played Adolf Hitler.
Mm-hmm.
He was an actor who gets to.
Mm-hmm.
He thought, oh my God, I can learn something about myself and about the world by playing a man who tried to kill my ancestors.
Yeah, fascinating. Do you think that that's innate or learned by actors? Do you think that's like an innate? It's like an innate thing that just comes from their gut that they just get to versus those.
Yeah, I do. I think they're the actors that are willing to confront ugliness and unpleasantness. I mean, the so-called negative emotions and negative experiences are just as rich and valuable as the so-called breakthroughs and positive and those experiences, which are actually easier but maybe not quite as rich in potential.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is something that people either have or don't have.
Yeah, that's interesting. So when you think about your friend who played Adolf Hitler, for example, and that being read by audiences, I know actually in the book you do talk about the Mark Taper Forum. Is that correctly? Mark Taper Forum? Yeah. Talk a lot about the absurdist theater that happened then. And that was, of course, a time and a place for absurdist theater that I don't know too much about, but I think...
Actually, the absurdist theater was more in my college days in the 60s and early 70s. At the Taper, they were doing a lot of great work, and Zoot Suit and Children of a Lesser God came out of the Taper, and but go on. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
That's okay. Edgy though would be maybe kind of where I would go. I mean, these are edgy, if not absurdist. These are edgy plays, I would guess. I mean, to put Adolf Hitler on a stage and give him lines, that's kind of an edgy thing. I just kind of think about a play that I did a couple of years ago. I did God of Carnage, and in it there's a racial epithet at the end. So I played the bad guy who says the racial epithet, and I kind of just went in it. Like, there was talk about whether or not we would cut that part out. The director said nope, and the artistic director said leave it in. It's how it was written. That's what we're gonna do. So of course I just did it. But I have to say there's a weird moment, when you're on stage saying something like that, and that there's people in the audience that could be offended by this. And you actually talked about it a little bit in your book about how somebody can get up and offend the audience. And I think you told a story about a director who was like, I don't give a shit about you people, get out of here anyway. I'm curious about...
Well, that's actually the same guy.
Is it? Okay.
That's Steven Berkoff. He directed a production of Metamorphosis, the Kafka version, and people were leaving in droves. And he and I were sitting in the stairs on the at the top of the theater, and he was saying out loud, "Go home to your effing swimming pools, you." And I kept going, Stephen, you're talking out loud, and I don't care. and there's a certain element of freedom for artists if you genuinely don't care.
Yeah. And I think that's what I was getting to. I think that there's there's part of it is like we're kind of doing our job. But look, it's hard to stand up on a stage and do something like that from my perspective as an actor and not have something somewhere in the back of your mind going, is somebody upset about this out there? Did I just upset somebody?
Well, that's because you as actors, all of you as actors, have an inordinate need to be loved and approved of. And so it's hard for you all to be disgusting and horrible. But the truth is you all have that in you somewhere. And did you watch Animal Kingdom at all?
The play or
no, the television series?
I don't think I did.
That was one that I also loved working on because it was a family of bad criminals.
I see.
And all of those guys that played the sons that were horrible were lovely people.
Sure.
But they were completely willing to tap into the bleakest and darkest parts of themselves so that they could portray evil.
Yeah. And was there some writing in those episodes for those characters that did show the human side and the humanity side? Because I think of like Sons of Anarchy, right? And the main character Charlie Hunnam, who plays this guy who's like this outlaw criminal and all this biker gang, but really at the end of the story is about how he's trying to kind of climb out of that and show his humanity. So when we write that in, I mean, was that part of Animal Kingdom?
Absolutely. I mean, they were all the sons of a very disturbed woman who was the matriarch of the family and the crime lord. And they grew up where that was the expectation, that they should excel as deviants. And every single one of them was just trying to please their mom.
Yep. And
We've all been there.
there's the heart of the conflict, and you're right, we have all been there. But there's the heart of the conflict, right? So you also talk about another lesson that I really latched onto that I really loved, and I'd love to talk about, which is giving adjustments. So you do talk in the book about how you would give adjustments to actors, and I don't want to give too much away here, so I'm going to keep this brief. But that there was only certain scenarios in which you would give an adjustment, and my question is, really, it's a question for the actors out there that are listening to this podcast. How does an actor take the most advantage of an adjustment when it comes out? Sure, we can hear adjustment and go, great, sounds good, and then we could do it. But I'm sure you've been in rooms where you give an adjustment hoping for something more, and then they do the exact same thing again.
Exactly.
Right? Do you have any?
That's my most unhappy experience, is when an actor says, "Hey, John, would you like to see it another way?" Or I say, "Hey, I'd like to see it another way. Could you think about this and this and that?" And then they do it exactly the way they did it before. And unfortunately, that shows a lack of connection, a lack of skill, muscle, and a certain kind of overconfidence and arrogance that speaks to whether they're going to be good collaborators and good members of the community.
That's interesting. That last part is really interesting. You're looking for that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you're absolutely looking for that, because you're building an ensemble, of course, as a casting director when you're dealing with the series. Yeah, I thought that was interesting, because I can see, the actor essentially doing the same thing, especially if they ask for it, and then they do the same thing anyway. Yeah, and it could also just be that, like, actors could just be nervous people in general, right? And it could be just like a sign of either immaturity, or you're, not quite introspective enough, or that you're just nervous. Have you seen some actors kind of work through that in the many thousands of actors you've seen? And I'm sure you have. Have you seen some actors sort of work through that kind of nervousness? I would sort of just like imagine if it were me and I heard an adjustment, I might need to just take a couple of seconds, if you don't mind, John. Can I get a couple of seconds? Let me just process that real fast. And so I would imagine maybe you've seen that as well.
But that's what you're learning about each other in the audition process is, are you mature enough as an artist and as a person to hold on to your space and to really consider the adjustment that I've given you, not jump to the result. Oh, he wants me to be more this or less that, or I know what to do about that. But putting it through your real your real process. So then I know you have a process, and that you're not just jumping to the result, but that you're jumping to, how do I make that happen? Not what is the result, but how do I, from inside out, how do I make that adjustment?
Yeah, that's fascinating. Not focusing on the result. That makes a lot of sense. I imagine as actors, we look to the result. We want to impress, right? Like you said, we want to be loved. We want to be liked. We want to be impressed. So we jump to the result instead. I'm thinking of times that I've been given an adjustment in casting, and how in an audition, and how I've responded. In particular, I have been asked to do it again, but show a little bit more empathy. I'm curious if you've seen that in actors that you've auditioned as well. And the reason why I ask is because I've always kind of struggled with that. Like I remember recently I got an adjustment, I don't know, sometime this year, when somebody asked me, "Can you say it again like I'm your best friend?" And that caused me to really tone way down and pull it all way back. And I think it was for camera, so I did pull it back. But I still remember kind of struggling, and I remember at the end of it thinking, "Gosh, I hope that was different. I think it was a little different. I'm not sure." Have you seen actors struggle with empathy in particular? Because at the end of the day, that's what these series are about, right?
Yeah, I think that what they're really asking you to do is to get out of yourself and pay attention to the other character. And what you need, every acting teacher in the history of mankind has said, you have an intention, or it's an action, or you're it's something you need to accomplish vis-a-vis the other character, something you want the other character to learn about you, and something you want to learn about them.
That's right.
And I think all that adjustment means is listen a little harder and try to evoke some kind of change, or communicate some kind of a feeling to the other person.
Mm.
Not just, don't be there by yourself.
That's right. Go for the win, right? Have an ask and go for the win.
Yeah.
Great. So another thing that I learned from the book that was very cool was I never knew the history of breakdown services, and so I have to assume it's the same breakdown services that owns Actors Access today, and probably does lots of other stuff. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I did not know. Were you one of the first employees then of breakdown services? Was it just kind of bootstrapped at that time?
No, it was already a going concern. Gary Marsh had a brilliant idea, and he made it happen. And he had a partner at the time, a guy named Peter Weiss, who was the first person I knew who knew anything about computers.
Mm-hmm.
So he began to digitize some of the process, and it grew. But by the time I got there, it had been around, I think, say 10 years,
Got it.
8, 10 years, something like that.
Right. And so the service, as I understand it, I'm gonna like make this really simple, but the service, as I understand it, is essentially creatively writing these characters in such a way that it gives the actor something to read and understand and digest, and then go off of, presumably to give a great audition performance.
Yeah, it informs the agent, who the smart agent,
Mm,
about which actors he ought to submit, she ought to submit, and then it informs the actor. It's the beginning of the communication between the writer, director, casting director, and the actor.
great. And only a casting director can come up with an idea like that, I would imagine, at that time. It's pretty brilliant, right? Because producers weren't writing that at that time. I'm sure the writers weren't writing that, were they?
Well, no, the original casting director was the secretary to the producer, who would call agents and check availabilities on lists that the producer had made.
Mm. Got it. Right. Because things were written for roles at that time. They were written for people. Roles were written for people at that time.
Sure, and that was the studio system, and where actors were under contract, day players all the way to stars were already under contracts to particular studios. So you would just kind of go into a little folder and see, oh, well, what 25-year-old handsome leading men are in the contract world here, and oh yeah, I've worked with him before, and he can play that juvenile lead, and
Mm-hmm.
done.
Yeah, cool. So my question is, I mean, for actors that you've seen over the years who come in, audition, and they seem to just hit that breakdown just spot on, just hitting the breakdown. They've got the look, they've got the feel, but they've even got the moments, right, in the audition. I think there was a story you told about a particular actor who on ER had to, take some blood, right? And so like just hit the beat of like taking a blood and finding a vein, like that almost awkward silence at that moment. I'm curious, for those actors who have hit those breakdowns that you've either created or put out there, was there anything in particular, like any magic behind that? Or is it just true that these actors just embodied it? Like you said, don't wear the mask. They just bring their being into that role. Is there any like practical tips of like how to read a breakdown
I
correctly?
think the answer to that is that those actors are the ones that combine instinctive talent, great empathy and understanding of people, love of people, and training.
Mm, that's right. Training on the tail end there, just as important.
Yeah, because then they have something to rely on. They have technique to rely on, skill. You know, I think in some ways the very I don't know if this is really fair, but I think the greatest actor I've had the pleasure of working with is W.H. Bill Macy,
Mm-hmm.
because he combines skill with talent
Mm-hmm.
and experience
Mm-hmm.
and openness, and he has it all.
Mm. Awesome. Very cool. Now, just kind of fast forwarding, I'm going to kind of fast forward to sort of like, Emmy wins, awards start coming. You really start seeing sort of the external external awards that happen to us when we're in a successful career, right? You talk a lot about sort of looking back in the book on the success and kind of attributing it, to these different things. And I'm curious, how much do you attribute to the success and longevity of your career to like those around you? You talk a lot about that in the book, right? It's a collaborative event. It's people who gave you your first job. That's all important. Versus your sort of tenacity, right? And luck and talent and just ambition. Because those two things are there. It's sort of like you had people who were in your corner, you leaned on people, you thanked people, but like you also had your own, tenacity and ambition. And I wonder how you kind of think about those two things in conjunction these days. Is it one? Is it the other? Is it both of them combined?
I mean, I think the answer to that question is yes.
Mm-hmm.
It's all of those
Mm-hmm.
things. It's my childhood. It's my father's expectations. It's my mother's love. It's my family's interest in the arts. It's the eclectic group of people that I got to know at 6 and 9 and 14. And it's my years as a high school athlete being part of a group. And then it's my years in the theater in college and the 60s, and how important community was to my development as a person, collaboration, and how I found that community in my profession. And it was luck. It was all of those things combined. That's why I use the word. I don't want it to sound like a religious word, so I don't use the word blessing.
Mm-hmm.
I use the word grace, and I've been graced by a confluence of events and people and natural skills and experiences and heartbreak and devastation and anger and rage, all in a weird stew, and it turned out to be me. And, and
Yeah.
I was able to turn that into a successful career and a contribution to, I think we all want to leave the world a little better than we found it.
Yep.
And no, I don't mean this immodestly, but I feel that I have done that.
Yeah, well, and on that note, having one of the big contributions is one of the many contributions I would imagine that you recognize is really kind of like launching the careers of many, many, many actors who became very big stars after being on some of these shows. How does it feel kind of looking back on that? I wonder, if that's a real point of joy for you, and a real proud
Absolutely.
moment.
And that's the right word. It is an absolute point of joy. Um, One of the great ideas that Trudy had when we were putting the book's final pieces together was to do those lists of all of the actors who appeared in ER and The West Wing. I think we only did it for those two shows.
Mm-hmm.
But when I even, there was a lot of kind of like, holy shit, she was in
Yes.
ER?
Yeah, that's right.
She was 9.
Yeah.
Oh, and that is an enormous source of pride. When Jessica Chastain
That's right.
became Jessica Chastain,
Yep.
I sent her a little note saying, thanks for making me look good.
That's right. Yeah, she was one of the ones that I had actually picked out. Also, Jeremey Allen Wright. What an incredible and illustrious career he's pulled out. That when he was
He's still a very young man.
yes, yeah, definitely, yeah, and he was young in Shameless, I believe, in the first season of Shameless, teenager, younger than teenager, I
Just
think.
graduated from the High School of the Performing Arts in New York City.
Yeah, how was that audition? Do you remember?
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah,
Yeah, very well.
yeah. What did he do that was
Yeah,
like really memorable?
I think the funny story about Jeremey is that after he got the part, he went back to New York after we cast it. No, after we shot the pilot, and then when it got picked up to series, he came back to LA and he had a black eye. And we were like, "Whoa, what happened?" And he was like, "I don't really remember. It was New Year's Eve and it had something to do with a girl." And so we got a real, Jeremey was, uh, uh, he's just a fountain of wonderful emotion. And the people on the Bear really are smart because he is at his very best when he's doing nothing.
Mm,
And they stop all of the chaos and just cut to his face where he's thinking and feeling something. And he's not talking and he's not doing and he's not chopping vegetables and he's not saying fuck 100 times in a sentence.
exactly.
He's just sitting there, don't just do something, stand there.
Hmm.
And he really is great at that.
It's an art to stand to do nothing and still say something, is it not?
Yeah, it's because you're not doing nothing.
Right, right.
You're letting people inside your heart and your mind and letting them see your thoughts and feel your feelings.
Yeah. Sage advice for all actors out there who get a little uncomfortable in the moment of silence. Silence is a
Yeah,
good thing because silence always says something.
absolutely.
It's been wonderful chatting with you, Frank. Before we go, I have one last question, actually, and that is, did Timothy Leary get the role of the shaman on Briscoe?
Yes, he sure as hell did.
It was
Yeah,
a cliffhanger.
and by the way, he was good
Yeah,
because he was being himself.
he's just being Timothy Leary, so it was just easy.
Yeah.
It was a cliffhanger at the end of a chapter, I think, and I thought I finished the chapter, and I went, wait a second, hold on, did he get the role or not? I think it wasn't.
Yes, he did.
Yeah, that's really, really wonderful stories in this book. I have to say, I read recently. I finished the Brando autobiography, which was
Oh, it's great, isn't it?
yeah. Have you read it? It was
Yeah.
great, full of Hollywood stories. If you're interested in Hollywood stories, like that's a great book for it. But what was notably missing was actually quite a bit of the personal side. He made a note, I think, in the beginning of the book that he would not be speaking about his, I think, 3 wives that he had at one point, and then he stayed away from the topic entirely. So there was a decision made there. It wasn't just like he skipped it over. Like there was a decision. I am not going to talk about that, but I'll give you everything else. And
Yeah.
I do think that your book has more because you gave it more, and so I think
I was led by the scruff of my neck, kicking and screaming, because I'm really a private person, and that was so hard for me. But it makes the book special, and I'm very glad that you got that, and that resonated for you, and I hope that it does for other readers because it wasn't easy to reveal myself. I'm behind the scenes.
hmm
I'm not the leading character, and in my book, I am.
hmm
And if I can just plug for a minute and say the book
Please.
is available on Amazon. There are 3 kinds of versions of it. There's an ebook, which I think is under $10 or so.
No brainer.
There's a paperback, which is under $20, and there's a hardcover, which is I think around 30. And it's also available on my website, and I'll mail you an autographed copy if that is of interest to someone. My
That's wonderful.
website is available. You can find it. My Instagram is John_Frank_Levey, Levey. And you can find my website on my Instagram. And I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about the book. It you know, again, I hope I don't seem immodest about it, but it's a hell of an accomplishment
hmm
to look back at your life and collect it in a way that can be of value to specific group of people like young actors or directors or casting directors or writers, but also in some way to anybody, because it's the story of growing and changing and actualizing yourself, becoming the best version of yourself, finding yourself,
Yeah.
being yourself. And I think if more of us were more authentic and more open, we'd be better brothers and sisters and mothers and fathers and aunts and uncles and presidents and doctors and lawyers and anything.
Yeah.
We should all be on a journey of self-actualization. It would make the world uh, a realer place.
Beautifully said. I was actually going to end it by asking you, what should we remember about the book years from now? What do we want to remember about the book? But I don't think you could have said it any better as you just did. So thank you for that. Also, the website is John Frank Levey, Levey.com, and I did see that there's a form there. So I think if you want to order the book and get a signature, you can do that. That's fantastic. With that, thank you so much for being here with us today. This has been an absolute pleasure speaking with you, learning from you, and I do wholly recommend the book. It is fantastic. It's called Right for the Role, and with me is author and legendary casting director, John Frank Levey. Thank you so much for your time today, John.
My pleasure. Good luck at the neighborhood playhouse. Knock 'em dead.
Thank you, sir. I will. Take care. Hey, Thomas here again. Thanks so much for listening to today's episode. The show is better when I get to hear from you. Got a question to ask our producer? Or you got a show idea or a guest I should interview? Maybe you just want to tell me that you love or can't stay on the show. Either way, I want to hear from you. You can reach me at bigbreakpod@gmail.com, and you can find my acting profile at castingtom.com or at castingtom. Big Break Pod is created and hosted by me, Thomas M. Copeland. The show is a proud member of the Pod Populi Network. Original music by me. Find the show online at bigbreakpod.com and at bigbreakpod.